He thought switching schools would be a fresh start, but what happened in that bathroom changed everything. Watch till the end. This story takes a turn you won't see coming. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Tony Bryant stood at the iron gates of Westbrook High, gripping the straps of his backpack so tightly that his knuckles whitened. The cold air of early March bit at his skin as he looked at the vast building ahead. Rows of students streamed past him, faces bright, carefree, laughing among themselves. Tony stepped forward, already feeling the invisible walls go up around him. He wasn't like them. His skin was darker, his clothes weren't branded, and he didn't have a history here. He was an outsider, and everyone could see it. The first week passed in a blur of cold shoulders and silent judgments. In the cafeteria, tables filled up as soon as he approached, leaving him to eat alone in the corner. Whispers followed him down hallways. Boys nudged each other, glancing at him and snickering. In gym class, it got worse. During basketball scrimmages, Tony barely touched the ball before it was knocked from his hands. Shoves, accidentally, sent him sprawling onto the polished floor. His every movement was scrutinized and mocked. Teachers turned blind eyes. Tony kept his head down, fists clenched inside his pockets. He was taught to endure. His mother's words echoed in his ears every morning as he trudged through the school's front doors. Be strong, be better, let them choke on their own hate. Tony carried that promise like armor, shielding himself behind silence. But cracks began to show. By the second month, the bullying sharpened into cruelty. His sneakers went missing during gym, later found dangling from a lamppost outside. Someone poured soda over his books in the library. Graffiti appeared on his locker one morning. A crude drawing of a monkey and the word N*gur scrawled underneath. His stomach twisted at the sight, but he wiped it clean without a word. One afternoon, in the packed cafeteria, a tray slammed into his shoulder, splattering mashed potatoes down his sweatshirt. Laughter erupted around him. Tony turned slowly, meeting the smirking face of Jet Tanner, the school's golden boy and captain of the basketball team. Jet stood tall, blond, with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Oops," Jet said loudly. "Guess you don't belong in the clean section." Tony stared at him, his heart pounding. Around them, a circle of students formed, eager for entertainment. For a split second, Tony wanted to punch him, hard, but instead he turned away, grabbed a handful of napkins, and cleaned himself off. The laughter stung deeper than the cold. After that, things escalated. Every day became a minefield. Locker slams, tripping in hallways, whispered slurs that cut deeper than fist. Tony absorbed it all, locking it away inside. His grades suffered. His appetite disappeared. He stopped answering his mother's questions with more than a shrug. The first real crack came during gym class one Friday. They were playing basketball again. Tony moved fast, weaving through defenders, about to make a shot. Jet charged him midair, knocking Tony onto the hard floor. The whistle blew, but no foul was called. Laughter roared around him. Tony lay there breathless, staring at the ceiling, hearing the snickers, the whispers. "Stay down, monkey," someone muttered. Tony sat up slowly. He looked around at the faces, laughing, uncaring, indifferent. Even Coach Barnes, who should have stepped in, just turned away, pretending to scold another player. That night, Tony sat on his bed, the dim light of the street lamp outside casting shadows across his room. He stared at his worn basketball, spinning it slowly on his finger, not really seeing it. His chest burned with shame, with anger, with helplessness. How long could he keep swallowing it? How long before he broke? Saturday passed in a haze. He didn't answer texts from the few kids who'd once tried to be friendly. He barely spoke to his mother. Sunday night, lying awake, he stared at the ceiling, feeling like he was drowning. Tomorrow would be another day, another battle. But Tony didn't know that tomorrow everything would change, because tomorrow they would finally push him too far. And this time, he would not just take it. Monday started like any other miserable day at Westbrook High. Tony walked through the hallways with his head down, his backpack weighing heavier than usual on his shoulders. Whispers followed him as he passed groups of students leaning against lockers. He had learned to block out their words, to focus on the sound of his own breathing instead. But deep down, a storm was gathering inside him, and he could feel it churning more violently with every passing hour. By lunchtime, the tension had grown unbearable. Tony carried his tray carefully, scanning the crowded cafeteria for an empty spot. As usual, there were none. Laughter erupted from one table near the back, and when Tony glanced over, he saw Jet Tanner smirking at him, surrounded by his pack. Tony set his tray down at a corner table, trying to ignore them, but he could feel their eyes boring into him. "Hey, janitor," Jet called across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You missed a spot." The cafeteria roared with laughter. Tony stared down at his food, fists clenching under the table. He couldn't even taste the sandwich he forced himself to chew. Every bite tasted like ash. The final bell rang at the end of the day, but Tony's relief was short-lived. He had basketball practice and dreaded every second of it. The gym was buzzing with noise as he changed in the locker room. He moved quickly, hoping to avoid attention. It didn't work. Jet and his friends cornered him near the lockers. "You think you're better than us, huh?" Jet said, shoving Tony against the cold metal. "Too good to fight back?" Tony stared at him, jaw tight. He said nothing. Speaking would only give them more ammunition. "You need to learn your place," Jet sneered. Practice was brutal. Every time Tony touched the ball, someone knocked him down. Every time he went for a shot, someone fouled him hard. Coach Barnes watched but said nothing. At the end of practice, Tony lingered behind, pretending to tie his shoelaces. He wanted the others to leave first. He wanted to walk home alone. But when he finally made his way to the locker room, he found Jet, Marcus, and Larry waiting. They didn't say a word. They just grabbed him. Tony struggled, but it was 3 against 1. They dragged him into the boys' bathroom connected to the locker room. His heart pounded against his ribs as he realized what was coming. "No cameras in here," Jet said, grinning. They shoved him toward a stall. Tony fought harder, managing to land an elbow into Marcus's ribs. Marcus grunted and punched him hard in the stomach. Tony folded over, gasping for air. They forced his head toward the toilet. Tony thrashed, kicked, tried to scream, but Marcus clamped a hand over his mouth. The icy water hit his face. They dunked his head into the filthy toilet, holding him down. The humiliation burned worse than the water stinging his eyes. He felt them laughing above him, felt the force of their hands pressing him down. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then they yanked him up, laughing hysterically as he coughed and gasped for air. "Next time, bring a snorkel," Jet said, slapping the back of Tony's head. They left him there, soaked, humiliated, shivering. Tony staggered to the sink, staring at his dripping reflection in the cracked mirror. His chest heaved with every breath. He looked into his own eyes and saw someone he barely recognized. Weak, broken, no more. Something snapped inside him. That night, Tony sat on the edge of his bed, dripping water still in his ears, clothes stuffed into a plastic bag under his bed so his mother wouldn't see. He stared at the ceiling, at the cracks in the paint. His fists clenched and unclenched. He wouldn't go to the principal. They wouldn't listen. They never had. He wouldn't cry. He wouldn't beg. He would fight. Not with blind rage. Not with fists alone. He needed a plan. A way to make sure they couldn't hide. A way to show everyone who they really were. Tony grabbed his old cracked phone from the nightstand. He turned it on, opened the voice recorder app, and stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow he would not be the victim. Tomorrow they would see the storm they created. The next morning, Tony woke up with a new kind of energy coursing through him. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something colder, sharper, more focused. He dressed in silence, slipping his cracked phone into his jacket pocket, making sure the battery was full. He ate breakfast, barely tasting it, his mind already racing through scenarios of what might happen. Today, he would be ready. Today, he would not turn the other cheek. School was the same sea of indifference and malice as always. He walked the halls like a ghost, unseen by the teachers, mocked by the students. He ignored the comments and the laughter, the shoves against his locker. He kept one hand in his pocket, ready to hit record at a moment's notice. He waited. It didn't take long. In the third period hallway break, he saw Jet and his crew leaning by the vending machines, whispering and snickering as they spotted him. Tony kept walking, pretending not to notice. His heart thudded hard, but his face stayed blank. He stepped into the bathroom casually, as if it were just another trip between classes. Just as he expected, footsteps followed him moments later. He stood at the sink, head bowed, pretending to wash his hands. In the mirror, he watched as Jet, Marcus, and Larry came in grinning like predators. "Look who's back for a swim," Jet jeered. Tony slowly pulled his hand from his pocket, tapped the record button without them seeing, and slid the phone into the inner lining of his hoodie pocket. Audio, clear and ready. He turned to face them. His face was calm, almost bored. "You deaf now, too?" Marcus sneered. Larry moved to block the door, his large frame filling the exit. Jet stepped closer, chest puffed out, hands twitching like he was ready to shove Tony into the nearest wall. "Thought you'd learn your place after yesterday." Tony stared at him, meeting his eyes for the first time, not flinching. Jet didn't like that. His lip curled. "You think you're better than us?" Jet spat. "You're nothing. You always will be." Marcus laughed a dry, cruel sound. Larry cracked his knuckles. Without warning, Jet shoved Tony hard in the chest. But Tony didn't stumble. He didn't fall. He moved. Fast, precise, focused. He grabbed Jet's wrist, twisted it downward, and stepped into him, driving his shoulder into Jet's ribs. Jet gasped in pain and crumpled to one knee. Marcus lunged forward, but Tony pivoted, planting a solid punch into Marcus's gut. Marcus folded over, wheezing. Larry rushed him, fists raised, but Tony ducked low, sweeping Larry's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the tile floor with a heavy thud. The bathroom echoed with the sounds of struggle boots, scuffing tile fists meeting flesh, gasps of pain. But in less than 20 seconds, it was over. Jet lay on the floor, clutching his wrist. Marcus groaned against the wall, and Larry sat dazed, blinking in confusion. Tony stood over them, breathing hard, but in control. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He pulled his phone from his pocket and clicked to stop on the recorder. He walked to the door, pausing only once to glance back at them. "Next time," Tony said, voice low and steady, "make sure nobody's listening." He left the bathroom, leaving them sprawled, humiliated, and gasping. Tony didn't go straight to class. Instead, he made a short detour. In the back stairwell, near the janitor's closet, where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest, he uploaded the recording. He didn't add any edits, any captions, just raw audio. The slurs, the threats, the laughter, the violence. He titled it simply Westbrook Truth. Within minutes, students' phones across campus buzzed with notifications. Heads bowed over screens, whispers grew louder. Eyes darted toward Tony in the hallways wide with shocked curiosity and something else, to respect. At lunch, the cafeteria was different. Tony entered, carrying his tray, feeling the hum of conversation around him like electricity in the air. Some students looked at him with something close to guilt, others with open admiration. A few stood awkwardly, giving him space. Nobody tripped him. Nobody laughed. Jet Marcus and Larry slunk into the cafeteria much later, faces grim, bodies tense. The laughter that once followed Tony now followed them. Coach Barnes was waiting at their table, arms crossed, face thunderous. He grabbed Jet by the arm, yanking him to his feet, and marched him out, followed by the other two. Principal Rollins announced over the intercom that an emergency meeting for the basketball team would be held immediately. Whispers rippled through the school like wildfire. By the end of the day, it was official. Jet Marcus and Larry were suspended from the team indefinitely pending further disciplinary review. Their perfect golden images shattered. Tony watched it all unfold with a quiet calm. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply picked up his backpack and walked out of the building into the late afternoon light. He wasn't done yet. He knew better than to think one battle won the war. But for the first time in months, he walked with his head high. And they watched him go. By Tuesday morning, Tony Bryant's name was known in every corner of Westbrook High. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded respectfully when he passed. Some even clapped him on the back in silent support. The recording had shattered the false normality of the school, and there was no turning back. Jet Marcus and Larry had been officially suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. Their parents had been called in, and rumors swirled that legal action was being considered. They had been stripped from the basketball team, their reputations crumbling faster than anyone could have imagined. In a school where image was everything, Tony had delivered a blow that they would never recover from. Tony walked through the hallways with a new kind of silence surrounding him, not of rejection, but of wary respect. Teachers who once ignored him now watched him carefully, some with guilt, some with thinly veiled admiration. Principal Rollins called him into his office during third period. Tony sat stiffly across from the heavy oak desk, while Rollins, a man with graying temples and a tight mouth, leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "I reviewed the recording, Bryant," he said carefully. "I want you to know that we do not condone any form of harassment here at Westbrook. What happened to you is unacceptable." Tony stayed silent, waiting. He didn't trust easy apologies. "Effective immediately," Rollins continued. "We're instituting mandatory diversity and sensitivity training, and we're launching a full investigation into the basketball program and the athletic department's culture." Tony nodded once. It wasn't enough to erase the months of humiliation, but it was a start. "You did the right thing coming forward," Rollins said more quietly, almost like a confession. "Most wouldn't have had the courage." Tony stood up ready to leave, but paused at the door. Without looking back, he said, "I didn't do it to be courageous. I did it because nobody else would." The door clicked softly behind him as he stepped back into the hallway. Later that day, during lunch, Tony sat alone at his usual table, eating slowly, methodically. It felt different now. Eyes still followed him, but not with the same cruelty. A few minutes after he sat down, he noticed movement from the edge of his vision. Reeve, a boy from Tony's English class who had always kept to himself, approached, carrying his tray awkwardly. "Mind if I sit?" Reeve asked, voice low. Tony shrugged. Reeve sat down. "I saw what they did to you before," Reeve said, picking at his sandwich. "I didn't say anything. I'm sorry." Tony looked at him for a long moment, then simply nodded. Others began to follow. A girl named Mia from history class, a boy from the soccer team. Soon, Tony's table was full of quiet, respectful conversation. Nobody mentioned the recording directly, but it hung in the air between them like a shared secret. After school, Tony lingered in the gym alone. The wooden floors gleamed under the setting sun. He bounced a basketball, slowly staring at the hoop. It wasn't about the game anymore. It was about something bigger. Coach Barnes entered at some point, his sneakers squeaking on the polished wood. He watched Tony for a long time before speaking. "You've got guts, kid," he said finally. "If you ever want to try out for varsity again, the spot's open." Tony caught the ball, spinning it slowly in his hands. He thought about it. Thought about the months of silence, of bruises, of drowning humiliation. Then he shook his head. "I'm good," he said, tossing the ball onto the rack and walking out. In the parking lot, Tony found Jet leaning against his car, arms crossed. His face was different now, tight, bitter, defensive. "You think you won?" Jet said when Tony approached. Tony stopped a few feet away. "I didn't win anything," Tony said. "You lost." Jet sneered, but there was no real fire behind it, just fear. "You ruined my life," Jet spat. "You ruined it yourself," Tony said simply. Jet stepped forward, fists clenching, but Tony didn't move, didn't flinch. And after a long, tense moment, Jet looked away, got into his car, and peeled out of the lot, leaving Tony standing there calm and unshaken. That night, Tony sat at his desk, staring at the cracked phone that had recorded everything. It felt like a relic now, a symbol of a battle fought and won, not with fists or fury, but with truth and patience and a refusal to stay silent. He plugged the phone into the charger, smiling faintly. Tomorrow would be a new day, and for the first time in a long time, he looked forward to it. The next morning, Westbrook High felt different from the moment Tony Bryant walked through the doors. There was still noise, chatter, and movement, but it was no longer laced with hostility toward him. Whispers still followed him, but they were tinged with awe, curiosity, even a hint of fear. He wasn't invisible anymore, and he wasn't a target. He had become something else entirely, a presence that couldn't be ignored. Tony moved through the halls with quiet purpose, nodding to those who acknowledged him, but never lingering. The old Tony would have kept his head down, counted the minutes until he could leave. The new Tony met gazes head-on and held them without flinching. He had earned this space, earned the right to exist without apology. In the cafeteria that day, he sat at his usual corner table out of habit. But it wasn't long before Reeve, Mia, and several others gathered around him, trays in hand, pulling chairs closer, forming a small protective circle without a word. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was respect. A silent recognition that he had stood up when no one else had dared, and in doing so, had changed the rules for everyone. During fifth period, Principal Rollins announced over the intercom that the students would be having an assembly the following week focused on bullying, diversity, and inclusion. The news barely registered for Tony. He had already had his victory. It wasn't in the policies or the speeches to come. It was in the way the school looked at him now differently, with the knowledge that he was not someone who could be broken. After the final bell, Tony gathered his things slowly. As he exited the school, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Jet Tanner standing there, fists clenched, shoulders tense. For a moment, Tony wondered if Jet would try something reckless, some last desperate attempt to reclaim the pride he had lost. Jet stopped a few feet away, breathing heavily. Jet started, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked like he had rehearsed this moment, but now faced with Tony, he couldn't find his voice. Tony watched him, expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," Jet finally forced out, his voice tight-strained. The words hung awkwardly between them. Tony didn't smile. He didn't offer forgiveness. He simply gave a small nod, enough to acknowledge the apology, but not enough to excuse what had happened. Jet's shoulders slumped and he turned away, disappearing into the crowd of students. Tony continued walking toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. He wasn't thinking about revenge or justice anymore. He was thinking about tomorrow and the days after that, about the life he would build from this moment forward. At the edge of the lot, he paused, glancing back at the school. It looked different, somehow smaller, less daunting. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He had faced them all, endured humiliation, betrayal, violence. And he had answered not with hatred, but with resolve, with cunning, with strength of character that none of them could match. Inside the bathroom, inside the cafeteria, inside every whispered hallway, he had fought for his place, not through violence alone, but by refusing to disappear, by refusing to let their hatred define him. He had shown them all that strength wasn't about throwing the hardest punch or shouting the loudest insult. It was about standing up, wiping yourself off, and daring them to try again, knowing they wouldn't break you. Tony turned away from the school and walked home, his steps steady, sure, free. For the first time in a long time, he felt light. He felt whole. He felt unbreakable. He didn't just survive. He changed the rules. If this story moved you, drop a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. See you in the next video.